Let me tell you something about Colette Elliott. She walked into every room as though the room had been waiting for her, like everyone inside had been standing around with nothing better to do than form an audience. She had that quality, that rare, magnetic, slightly infuriating quality that made strangers track her across a space without knowing they were doing it. I noticed it the first night I ever saw her 12 years ago, at a rooftop function in Manhattan, her dark hair pinned up, with what looked like a single chopstick, holding it all together through some architectural miracle. She laughed at something a colleague said, the sound carrying clean across the terrace. 3 separate conversations paused. I was one of those pauses. 12 years later, standing at our kitchen island on a Tuesday morning, watching her tip an oat milk latte she'd made herself into a travel cup she'd bought in Paris, I still felt the echo of that laugh, which is either the most romantic thing I've ever admitted or a clinical sign that I should have seen a therapist much, much sooner. Colette was senior features editor at Lux, one of those glossy aspirational magazines that lived on coffee tables and lobbies. Think 8-page spreads of unoccupied kitchens. Interviews with people whose problems were mostly aesthetic. She was brilliant at it. She had a nose for a story, a tongue that could dismantle a press release in 40 seconds, and a wardrobe that would make a stylist weep with envy. She was also, as I'd come to understand, in the way you come to understand things when you live with someone for a decade, a woman who needed to be the main character in every room she walked into. For 12 years, I let her be. Our marriage had settled into a comfortable architecture, her career surging forward like a freight train, my company expanding in the quiet, methodical way that businesses do when no one's watching them closely. That was the thing about Elliott underwriting. Nobody watched it closely, least of all Colette. I'd started building it 16 years ago, 2 years before she and I got serious. By the time we married, the foundations were already in place, a specialist underwriting firm that had steadily, quietly, become something formidable in the commercial insurance space. I had never hidden it from her. It just never seemed to interest her. She knew I ran a company, she knew it was doing well, she knew I owned a gym membership I used twice a week, and I had salt and pepper hair that she described generously as distinguished. Beyond that, the financial architecture of my life was something she regarded as best not thought about. $350 million in assets, as of last quarter. Not something I bragged about at dinner parties. We had a daughter, Alyssa, 11 years old. She's opinionated in the way that brilliant children are. Relentless with questions, precise with language, deeply unimpressed by anyone who wasn't earning it. She got that from me, I think, the stubbornness. Colette got credit for the cheekbones. It was from the outside, an enviable life. I knew that. I wasn't unhappy, not until Selene started having coffee with me. Selene Marsh lived 3 houses down. She was one of those people who had arrived in our neighborhood, fully formed, competent, watchful, blunt in the manner of someone who had stopped polishing her words sometime in her late 30s and never looked back. She and I had fallen into a friendship gradually, the way neighbors do when one of them starts walking a dog and the other starts sitting on a front porch with a newspaper. Our coffee dates were a Tuesday ritual. Selene, a mug of proper coffee, whatever truth she'd accumulated through the week. She had a gift for noticing things. Not nosiness, it was more observation. Though I appreciate that line can blur when what's being observed is your wife. She told me things gradually, carefully, considering that what she was saying cannot be unsaid. It started with small things. A car she'd seen parked outside our house twice on a Thursday afternoon, both times when I was away for work. A name, Joey, that Colette had mentioned on the phone in the front garden. Her voice dropped to a register Selene recognized as something other than professional. I sat with that for a moment, refilled my coffee, then said, with what I considered admirable composure, rehearsing things, right, that's not ominous at all. Selene didn't smile. She rarely smiled when she had something serious to say. Joey Davenport was the chief editor at Lux, Colette's direct superior, the man who held the keys to her promotion, the one she'd been circling for 8 months, the one she talked about the way other people talked about a destination they'd been saving up for their whole lives. I asked Selene if she was sure about what she saw. She gave me a look that suggested she found the question slightly insulting. I went back inside, stood at the kitchen island, the same spot where I watched Colette pour her morning coffee every day, and I thought about the freight train, about how long it had been running on a track I hadn't checked. I didn't confront her, neither did I spiral. I didn't call a friend and have a long, emotional, counterproductive conversation. I was 51 years old. I had built a company from scratch in an industry that respected nothing except consistency, and I understood in my bones that information gathered in haste is almost always incomplete. So I called Enrico Morton instead. Enrico Morton came recommended by a colleague who'd used him in a corporate fraud case 2 years prior. He was quiet, thorough, expensive, and communicated via email with the economy of someone who'd been paid by the word. His first report arrived 11 days after we met. I read it in my car in the parking garage beneath my office building, alone with the engine off, my phone flat on the passenger seat. It was thorough. Of course it was thorough. Enrico didn't do anything halfway. Joey Davenport was 54, divorced twice, currently leasing a penthouse apartment in Tribeca on a salary that would have made my accountant wince sympathetically. He was, by all professional metrics, a gifted editor, a visionary, some people called him. He had turned Lux from a mid-tier title into a cultural force over 6 years of editorial dominance. He was also, Enrico's photographs made clear, a man who had been conducting a relationship with my wife for approximately 7 months. 7 months. 7 months was last November. It was our anniversary dinner in February when she'd worn that deep burgundy dress, and I'd thought briefly that things between us felt warm again. The photographs were unambiguous. Restaurants I hadn't taken her to, a weekend in Philadelphia that she'd explained as a features conference. His hand at the small of her back in a hotel lobby, her face turned up to say something to him, that particular expression I knew well, the one she deployed when she was working to charm someone she needed something from. I sat in my car for 45 minutes. Then I called Juliet Goldstone. Juliet Goldstone's office occupied the top floor of a building on Park Avenue, and every element of it communicated that you were sitting across from someone who had never once found herself on the wrong side of a courtroom. The desk was huge, the bookshelves were neat. The diplomas on the wall were arranged without vanity, lined up and left to speak for itself. She was 56 years old, lean with reading glasses she wore pushed up onto her head when she wasn't using them, and dropped to the bridge of her nose the moment she decided something required her full professional attention. The moment she opened Enrico's file, the glasses came down. In 20 years, Juliet had 0 losses. I had done my research. I told her everything. The marriage, the timeline, Selena's observations, Enrico's findings, the promotion, the magazine, Joey Davenport. I told her about the assets, the company structure, the premarital documentation, the 16 years of careful construction before Colette ever appeared in my life. I told her what Colette knew, which was very little, and what she didn't know, which was most of it. Juliet made notes in a handwriting so small and efficient it looked like its own encoded language. When I finished, she set her pen down and paused. Then she said, "That is going to be a very interesting moment for her." She leaned back, glasses still down, considering. I asked what our strategy was. Juliet Goldstone looked at me over those glasses with the expression of a chess player who has already seen the end of the game. I nodded. I asked about the promotion. Juliet's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. Here is what I understood about Colette's ambition by the time Juliet started asking about it. Joey Davenport wasn't simply the man she was sleeping with. He was also the man who held the editorial director position she had been constructing herself toward for the better part of 2 years. The promotion was scheduled for board review in 6 weeks. Joey was the recommending voice and Colette was the candidate. She had told me about it over dinner in late January, her voice carrying the specific electricity of someone who had been waiting to say a thing for a long time. I listened, said the right encouraging things, and refilled her wine. Now, sitting in Juliet's office while Manhattan went about its afternoon outside the window, I saw the whole architecture of it differently. He was sleeping with her. She was up for the promotion he controlled, whether she had positioned herself deliberately or had simply allowed convenience to become strategy, I couldn't say. Colette was brilliant enough that the line between the two probably didn't present itself as a line at all, just a direction. Forward. Lighthouse Media was Lux's parent company. I looked at Juliet. I drove home that evening and watched Colette make dinner in our kitchen. She was in a cream silk blouse and wide-leg trousers, hair loose, chopping herbs with the focused grace of a woman who performed domesticity when she was in a good mood. She looked beautiful. She looked like she owned the room. "How was your day?" she asked. "Productive," I replied. Then she told me that Joey had as good as confirmed the editorial director role was hers. Her voice was lit from the inside. "I'm really glad to hear that," I said. The herbs smelled like something hopeful. I set the table for 3. Alyssa thundered down the stairs demanding to know what was for dinner, and for 27 minutes we were a family eating together in a warm kitchen. I held all of what I knew in my hands like something heavy and breakable and didn't drop it. That took more out of me than anything else in this story. A note about Ruby Fenton. Ruby was Colette's younger sister by 3 years, shorter, louder, and operating under the lifelong assumption that everything Colette had, should rightfully have been distributed more evenly between them. They had grown up in a household where Colette was the beautiful one, the clever one, the one who got noticed. Ruby had spent 42 years being introduced as Colette's sister, in the same tone people use to identify a supporting actor. She wasn't without her qualities. Ruby was warm, genuinely funny, and had a talent for real estate that had made her quite successful. But in the presence of Colette, she dimmed, tried harder. Colette, for her part, managed Ruby the way a beautiful woman manages her less beautiful friends, with a generosity that was also, ever so slightly, a performance. I had always liked Ruby more than I was supposed to. I called her on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks into my quiet preparations, and invited her for lunch. When we settled at the table, I told her enough, not everything but enough, that her expression moved through surprise, hurt on my behalf, and then a stillness that I recognized that she wasn't entirely shocked. I told her what I was going to do, the broad strokes. Ruby sat with it for a moment, then she said, with a directness that reminded me of why I'd always found her easier than her sister. It wasn't triumphant when she said it, it was just true. Ruby Fenton, for the first time in 42 years, would not be standing in her sister's shadow. What followed was 6 weeks of the most precise work I have ever done, and I include 16 years of building an underwriting empire in that comparison. Juliet's team went through every document, every asset register, every corporate filing with patience. My accountant, a man called Bernard, who had worked with me for 11 years, had the affect of someone who found joy primarily in correct categorization. Produced records so comprehensive that Juliet actually emailed me to say they were the cleanest premarital financials she had ever seen in 20 years of practice. I filed that email away as a specific kind of comfort. Enrico continued his work. The documentation grew. A second weekend trip, a lunch at a very expensive restaurant, charged to a credit card in Joey's name. Photographs, records, timestamps, the careful, irrefutable archaeology of a relationship conducted in the open by two people who had assumed no one was looking. I moved quietly and calmly. I didn't sleep well. The nights were the hard part, lying beside someone who doesn't know that you know. There's a specific kind of loneliness to it that, I have no better word for it, than hollow. You look at the ceiling, you think about the version of the life you thought you were living. You think about your daughter asleep down the hall, entirely unaware that the architecture of her daily existence is about to be restructured. Alyssa was the part of this I turned over the most carefully. She was 11, brilliant, willful, attached to both of us in the way children are attached, before they become old enough to start keeping score. I had long conversations with Juliet about the custody framework. I spoke privately with a family therapist my doctor recommended. I wasn't going to be the father who handled this badly. Whatever else happened in this story, Alyssa was the part I was going to get right. On the 42nd day after I'd first sat in Juliet's office, Colette called me at 8 in the morning. I already knew where she'd be at 2:30 on Thursday. Joey Davenport was in a board meeting from noon to 4. Thursdays were the days she stayed late in the office, building the case for her promotion, making herself indispensable in the language of print journalism, which is to say, through sheer talent applied to the right editor's vision. Or so I'd believed. Enrico had recently clarified that the late Thursday stays involved, on more than one occasion, considerably less work than I'd imagined. My phone rang. It was Colette. "I'm working late tonight, don't wait up." "That's fine," I said, and hung up. I sat at my desk. Outside my office window, Manhattan ran its engine, the noise of the city going about its business, indifferent to mine. I thought about the rooftop function 12 years ago, the single chopstick, the laugh that carried across the terrace. Then I opened my laptop and got back to work. Juliet chose the lobby of the Lux building, not the entrance, the lobby proper, where the reception desk sat beneath a 9-foot installation of abstract steel, where the editorial staff flowed in and out between meetings, where people who cared about appearances worked hard to project the right ones. A process server named Martin, who was in his late 30s, wore a plain suit, walked into that lobby at 2:28, found Colette Elliott waiting for the elevator after a meeting, and handed her a sealed envelope. I know the detail of this because Juliet's contact at the building, a security consultant who did work for both of them, had agreed to provide a timestamp record for legal purposes, confirmed the exchange. I didn't watch it. I was sitting in Juliet's office on Park Avenue, drinking coffee that was too hot, reading the same paragraph of an industry report 7 times. Colette called me 19 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let that go too. I wasn't being cold. Juliet had advised that any communication at this stage should go through her, and I had learned, in the past 42 days, the value of doing exactly what Juliet Goldstone said. The phone rang again for the 3rd time. I took that call but stayed silent. When Colette spoke, her voice had changed register. It was calculating, which told me more than anything she could have said. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the table. Juliet refilled my coffee without being asked. She had impeccable timing. It was possibly the least Juliet-like question she'd ever asked me. I think she was checking whether I was going to fracture. I wasn't. Colette retained an attorney within 24 hours, a man called Brennan, mid-level, adequate, unaccustomed to sitting across the table from Juliet Goldstone. The first joint meeting lasted 90 minutes. I was told afterward that Colette had arrived in her full editorial director confidence. The posture, the presence, the clear expectation that this situation, like every other situation, would resolve in her favor because she was someone rooms organized themselves around. She had built her expectations on what she knew about our finances, which was, as established, a comfortable but modest picture. Joint accounts, the house, 2 cars, a joint investment portfolio that I had structured conservatively because it was the only part of our finances she paid any attention to. She didn't know about Elliott Underwriting's corporate structure. She didn't know about the holding company. She didn't know about the asset base that had been legally documented as premarital property for 16 years. She also didn't know that the nice little business was worth, at last valuation, $350 million. Juliet told me that the moment Bernard's financial disclosure landed on Brennan's desk, there was a silence of approximately 30 seconds before Brennan asked to suspend the meeting. I would have paid real money to watch Colette's face in that room. The legal position, as Juliet laid it out, the company, its holdings, its subsidiaries, its asset base, all of it documented as premarital property, established, filed, and structured before the marriage certificate existed. The marital estate was a fraction, a small, carefully partitioned fraction. Joint property, shared investments, the house, these were divisible. The empire was not. Colette didn't take this quietly. She retained a second attorney, a more aggressive one, who immediately attempted to argue that her 12 years of domestic contribution and her support of my career had unjustly enriched the company's growth. Juliet demolished this with the efficiency of someone who had been building that particular counterargument since the second week of our engagement. The documentation was comprehensive. The corporate structure was airtight. Bernard had, over 16 years, maintained records of such exquisite accuracy that they read less like financial filings and more like a love letter to correct categorization. The aggressive second attorney filed 3 motions in 5 weeks. Juliet answered each one. The board of Lighthouse Media convened its quarterly review in the 3rd week of proceedings. Juliet had a contact there, a non-executive director named Maggie Blome, who had once been on the opposing side of a case Juliet had won in 2017, and had subsequently expressed over drinks at a legal conference that she would rather have Juliet on her side than against her. Maggie Blome was principled, governance-focused, and held the view, as she had once articulated publicly in an industry panel, that senior relationships within editorial hierarchies were a governance matter first and a personal matter second. No improper disclosure was made. Lighthouse Media's Employment Council, in reviewing standard conflict of interest documentation ahead of the quarterly board review, noted a discrepancy in the self-declaration forms completed by senior editorial staff. The discrepancy pertained to an undisclosed relationship between a chief editor and a direct report who was a current promotion candidate. Joey Davenport was suspended pending a compliance review on a Wednesday afternoon. The editorial director promotion was placed on hold indefinitely. Colette wasn't dismissed. She was too good at her job for that, and Lux was smart enough to know it. But the promotion, the thing she had been building toward, the thing she had, depending on how charitable you were feeling about her choices, used every available lever to secure, was placed in a drawer, and that drawer was closed. I heard about this through Selene, who heard it through the neighborhood's informal information network, which is to say, someone told someone who told Selene. She appeared at my door on a Thursday morning with her French press and an expression of deep, contained satisfaction. Ruby Fenton, I should tell you, handled the aftermath of her sister's unraveling with a grace that surprised me and probably surprised herself. She didn't gloat, but she didn't perform concern either. She was simply present, called me occasionally to check on Alyssa, dropped things off when Colette had the schedule, sent short messages that said practical things. She was, it turned out, a person of genuine substance who had spent decades being underestimated by someone who should have known better. The divorce settlement gave Colette her share of the marital estate, the joint investments, a buyout of her interest in the house, a vehicle, a maintenance arrangement for Alyssa's schooling that Juliet had structured to my satisfaction. It was fair. It was legally precise. It was nothing like what Colette had expected when she walked into that first meeting with Brennan. She moved into an apartment in Midtown, nice by most people's standards, considerably less nice by the standards of the woman who had owned every room. The editorial director role was eventually filled by an external hire. I know this because Alyssa told me her mother had mentioned it at dinner one Sunday with the careful, controlled expression of someone demonstrating that they didn't care. Alyssa was, throughout all of this, extraordinary. We told her together, Colette and I, in the living room she'd grown up in on a Saturday morning with the particular flat light that winter mornings have. We used the words a therapist had helped me prepare. We answered her questions with honesty calibrated to an 11-year-old's capacity. She cried, she was angry. She asked me point blank whether I had known for a long time. I said I had known long enough to be careful. She considered this. Then she said, "That's actually a pretty good answer." I took her for waffles afterward. It's not a solution to anything, but it's something. Waffles on a winter morning with your daughter, while your life reorganizes itself around you. She had 3. She gets the appetite from me. There is a morning about 4 months after the papers were signed that I keep returning to. It was an early Tuesday, still dark at 6:15, the city just beginning its engine noise. I made coffee in the French press I'd bought because Cellini had shamed me about my previous machine, and I sat at the kitchen island alone. The house was quiet. Alyssa was at her mother's. The salt and pepper-haired man, with the underwriting empire and the rebuilt life, had the kitchen entirely to himself. I thought about the rooftop, the chopstick, the laugh. I thought about 12 years of watching a woman own every room she walked into, while I quietly, methodically built the thing she'd never bothered to understand. I thought about Celine and her French press, and the particular quality of a friendship that tells you the truth. I also thought about Juliet Goldstone and her 20 years of zero losses, and about Bernard and his beautiful, meticulous spreadsheets, and about Enrico Morton's photographs, and about the look on Martin the process server's face when he handed an envelope to a woman who owned every room and walked back out into the lobby. I thought about Alyssa eating 3 waffles with the focused concentration of a person who takes pleasure seriously. The coffee was good. The kitchen was mine. I walked back into my life as though it had been waiting for me. I just hadn't known how much space there was until someone stopped owning the room. If you recognize something in this story, the slow erosion, the quiet suspicion, the careful maintenance of normal while everything shifts underneath, I want you to think about something. The moment you decide to stop reacting and start thinking is the moment the balance changes. Colette never lost because she was outwitted. She lost because the man she'd underestimated had spent 16 years building something she didn't think to look at. Know what you've built. Protect what you've earned. The people who minimize your quiet work are often the ones most astonished when it becomes undeniable. Surround yourself with the Cellinis of this world, the ones who tell you what they see even when it's inconvenient, because they respect you enough to believe you can handle it. Consult the Juliets, the precise, fierce, zero-loss professionals who turn your careful preparation into an outcome. Be the Mac, not the reaction, the calculation. Before you go, there's a question I want to leave you with. If the person you trusted most with your daily life had been conducting a separate life for 7 months, what's the first thing you would do? Drop your answer in the comments. The responses in this community are always worth reading. If you're new to our channel, subscribe. We tell the stories that don't get told at dinner parties. The ones with real stakes, real consequences, real people choosing, under pressure, who they actually are. We'll see you in the next one. Take care, and God bless.